What is happiness? Is it when you finally walk down the aisle, wearing your graduation cap and gown to receive your diploma? Or is it when you receive your first ever salary? How about when you get to say I do to your person at long last? Maybe it is as simple as blowing your cake amongst your family and friends. The feeling of the sand beneath your feet. Watching your favorite movie after a long day. Taking shots with your best friends at the local bar. Savoring the flavor of your favorite food that you bought yourself. By happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. By unhappiness, pain, and deprivation of pleasure. Do you think actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness? Will you do anything to eliminate pain to be happier? Will you sacrifice one person to save the lives of many?
사람을 그렇게 죽여버리지.
People are about to die.
Welcome to the Aika Show. I hope you're all enjoying the heat of the summer because I certainly do not. Here with us today is Kaye Lorenzo and her co-star Jorella Corres. And we will be talking about their recent film, Utilitarianism. Let's give them a round of applause. Welcome to the show. I've heard your movie was a great hit. Kamakailan nga ay nag-trending pa sa Twitter ang hashtag The Utilitarianism. Napaka-powerful naman talaga. But before we talk about that, why don't you guys say hi to the audience?
Hello, everyone. It feels so great to be here. Thank you for having us, Aika.
Indeed, damang-dama ko ang warm welcome ng ating audience. Magandang araw sa inyo.
Mukhang excited na nga ang ating audience. Now, going back to the movie, I've heard that this is a new experience for the both of you. Romantic comedies to this philosophical psychological film. Kumusta ang experience?
To be honest, I did not expect it to be this huge. Noong unang inoffer sa akin ni Director E, medyo hesitant ako kasi it's a big step away from what I usually do in movies. Pero nung nabasa ko yung storyline, parang there's this curiosity that built up. I was really affected by the plot. Ayun, at some point, I even enjoyed and related to it. So in the end, I'm excited to accept the offer.
At napakaganda rin nga ng resulta, no? Talagang masasabi mong worth the risk. How about you, Jorella? Kumusta ang experience?
Ayun, same with Kaye. It was a new genre for me. It was also a bit challenging because my character there was a bit mean, which is so out of my personality, even with my previous films. So I had to take time and internalize this character para magmukha talaga siyang palaban and medyo mataray, di ba? Pero all in all, it feels great to be given an opportunity and to be a part of this amazing team. At napakagaling naman talaga ni Director E.
Talaga nga namang napakagaling ni Director E. At syempre kayo rin as the stars of the movie. Now let's talk more about the movie, The Utilitarianism. Tell us something about the movie. What is it about?
The Utilitarianism movie is a psychological and philosophical movie based on the name itself, utilitarianism, a moral theory by John Stuart Mill that may provide answers to the moral dilemma presented in the trailer.
But as I've heard, what's interesting about this is not just the movie itself, but the concept of utilitarianism. Could you tell us more about that? But syempre, before we delve into discussing the concept itself, pwede nyo bang ipakilala muna kung sino nga ba ang proponent ng teoryang ito?
Okay, so John Stuart Mill is a late 19th century British philosopher, economist, and a political thinker. His beliefs, thoughts, and influential works can be attributed to his upbringing and ideology taught to him by his father, James Mill. His father was well acquainted with the leading political theories, Jeremy Bentham, and together they started a political movement that embraced philosophical radicalism and utilitarianism.
Oh, so masasabi pala natin na malaki rin ang parte ni Jeremy Bentham sa pagpapalaki kay Mill, no?
Yes, that's right. In fact, Mill's upbringing gave him a foundation, and later on in his life, he began to question some of his beliefs. So he struggled with the sense that utilitarianism was too unemotional and that it failed to capture or understand the higher pleasures.
Interesting, but did Mill ever use Bentham's framework?
Actually, utilitarianism is a revised theory of Bentham's utilitarian ideology. He changed it to make it a more positive, adopting the revised theory as his own system of belief. It is important to understand that Mill's utilitarianism upholds a more complex version as it is a product of a struggle to reconcile utilitarianism with complexities that Bentham's theory failed to acknowledge, yet one that still embraces the most basic premises of Bentham and Mill's father.
Okay, so J.S. Mill never rejected Bentham's theory pala. He only revised it and made it his own.
Yes, tama ka dyan, Aika. That's exactly it.
Okay, so now, how important it is to understand this concept of utilitarianism before watching the movie?
Kasi before you can watch it, you can learn the concept through the movie naman. Because basically, it is the application of this theory. But syempre, in order to fully enjoy and appreciate the movie, it is better if you have a grasp of Mill's theory.
Tama. Actually, isa yan sa exciting part ng movie talaga. Pero bago nga nung casting namin, pinabasa muna sa amin yung book. So, yun. Basically, it has 5 chapters as seen on our screen.
Wow, okay. So, medyo marami-rami pala, di ba? So, for the sake of our audience and of course of this show, is it okay if you walk us through it kahit konting chapters lang?
Of course, Aika, malakas ka sa amin eh. So for now, we will be focusing on the first 2 chapters. Your first chapter serves as an introduction to the essay, while yung second chapter, it discusses the definition of utilitarianism and presents some misconceptions about the theory, and of course, Mill's arguments in response to this. Basically, our first chapter is about establishing a valid foundation of morality. Napansin kasi ni Mill that time, parang wala pang valid theory na nagsisilbing basis na morality. Sinabi niya na hindi enough a moral instinct simply because it does not say much. According to him, it is necessary to assess by what standard human actions should be judged. At hindi kagaya ng science na walang particular truth sa ethics, that means we have different ends per situation.
To add lang din, categorizing an action as good or evil is not enough because it leaves us with the question, what made it good or bad?
Okay, so with that, I would like to ask lang, no, what do we evaluate when asking what is morally right or wrong?
Well, umiikot lang naman yan sa pag-evaluate natin. So what is morally right or wrong into three: person, action, and consequence. With the person, tinatanong natin yung intention and motive niya. Then dun pumapasok ang action. Ano nga ba ang nagawa niya? Lastly, from when this act is done, what resulted from it? What were the consequences?
So basically, do we have to assess the intention, action, and the consequences?
Not really. It actually highlights that instead of focusing on the intent behind our behavior or the behavior itself, what if we paid more attention to the consequences? So dito na rin pumapasok yung consequentialism, which highlights that asking whether an act is morally right or wrong depends on the consequences. Another consequentialism is the moral theory of utilitarianism.
Wow, that is a lot to digest. So basically, the consequence is what matters the most, right?
Exactly.
Ayon, okay. Now, since you have introduced the focal theory of our discussion, let me ask, what is utilitarianism? Paano nyo ba ito maipapaliwanag in a way na maiintindihan ng ating viewers, especially sa mga hindi pa nakakapanood?
Just like consequentialism, utilitarianism is a moral theory that focuses on the results or consequences of our actions and treats intentions as irrelevant. So, kumbaga, it would really not matter if anong action yung gagawin mo at kung ano naman yung intention mo, as long as in the end, marami ang sumaya.
Like the basis of morality as if in the end someone is happy.
Yep. And it says that actions are morally permissible if and only if they produce at least as much net happiness as any other available action. So, in other words, actions are right in proportion to their tendency to promote happiness and wrong in proportion to their tendency to promote the reverse of happiness.
But what is happiness? You've mentioned net happiness, diba? How is it similar and different to happiness itself?
That's actually easily defined by Mill. So, happiness is the gain of pleasure along with the absence of pain, while unhappiness is the presence of pain and privation of pleasure. On the other hand, net happiness is simply the totality of happiness when pain is reduced.
So to give you a better perspective, net happiness is equals to happiness minus pain. I know we all don't like math here. So but here's an example. Assuming that in the first scenario there's like 100% happiness but 90% pain. And in the second scenario, there's only 60% of happiness, but at the same time, pain is only 10%. Therefore, the net happiness in the second scenario is way bigger than the first. To make it more simple, what utilitarianism wants to say is that many things we do this for the sake of something else. You study to get a good grade or to learn. You work to get money or to sustain your needs and wants. But what do you want? Why do you want to get good grades or money? Because this is what we think. I want what I want because I think it will make me happy.
Wow, okay, so you lost me at the percent. Kidding aside, I hope our audience is still able to keep up with us. We will take a quick break, and when we get back, we will discuss the principle of utility and debunk some misconceptions about this theory. For the meantime, here's a quick video about utilitarianism. And we are back at the Ica Show. Still here with us are Kaye and Jorella from the Utilitarianism movie. Now, we will talk about the principle of utility before we go on with some questions for our guests. So, what's this principle about?
The principle of utility is merely about the greatest happiness of all of those whose interest it is in question. is the right and proper and universally desirable end of human action. In short, the greatest good for the greatest number.
And for you to be able to understand it better, here's a simplified overview of Mill's utilitarianism. First, pleasure or happiness is the only thing that has intrinsic value. Second, actions are right if they promote happiness and wrong if they promote unhappiness. And lastly, everyone's happiness counts equally. Utilitarians agree that a moral theory should apply equally to everyone. But they thought the way to do that was to ground it in something that is really intuitive. There is really nothing more basic than the primal desire to seek pleasure and to avoid pain.
I see. Therefore, we can judge the moral value of actions by the degree of happiness they tend to produce.
Yes, but we also want to highlight that utilitarianism is other regarding, meaning that we should pursue pleasure or happiness not just for ourselves, but for as many sentient beings as possible.
Like what was said earlier, the principle of utility is about producing the greatest good for the greatest number. So, sinasabi nito na we should choose the action that would produce the most overall happiness for the group, even though it produces less happiness for you than other alternatives would have.
I agree with Jorella. Where morality is concerned, utilitarians argue that as special as you are no more special than anybody else. In short, your interests count, but more than anyone else's. So utilitarians suggest that we make our moral decisions from the position of a benevolent, disinterested spectator.
Okay, from what I understand, what you are trying to say is that rather than thinking about what we should do, utilitarians suggest that we should consider what we would think if we were advising a group of strangers about what they should do.
Yes, that's
That's
basically it.
true.
Okay, so thank you so much, Kaye and Jorella, for running through John Stewart's theory of utilitarianism. I'm pretty sure that our audience will enjoy the movie and maybe relate to it even better now. But of course, before we let you go, here are some questions from our viewers. How do you think your character would answer these questions? Let's consider this as misconceptions about the utilitarianism. For the first question, is utilitarianism based and demeaning to reduce the meaning of life to pleasure?
Human pleasures are much superior animalistic ones. Once people are made aware of their higher faculties, they will never be happy to leave them uncultivated. Thus, happiness is a sign that we are exercising our higher faculties. So, when making a moral judgment in an action, utilitarianism thus takes into account not just the quantity, but also the quality of the pleasures resulting from it.
Definitely. In fact, happiness is not simply equivalent to pleasure. Mill categorizes pleasure into two. So the first one is lower quality pleasures, which involve the pleasure of the flesh, such as food, sex, etc. And second is higher quality pleasures, which involve our so-called higher faculties that we may refer to as intellectual pleasure, such as the pleasure we gain from finishing a research paper or being able to crack a scientific discovery.
But what's the difference between higher and lower quality pressures? What makes the former considered as higher?
You know, Aika, a pleasure is of higher quality if people will choose it over a different pleasure, even if it is accompanied by discomfort, and if they will not trade it for a greater amount of the other pleasure. To add, it is unquestionable fact that given access to all kinds of pleasures, people will prefer those that appeal to their higher faculties.
Actually, even though a person who uses high faculties often suffers more in life, he would never choose a lower existence, preferring instead to maintain his dignity.
Yes, and if you were to ask, but how does Mill know that the pleasures of the mind are qualitatively better than those of the body? While he says that to just ask those who have experienced both types of pleasures, and the vast majority will say that the intellectual are superior. For example, if we were to take a group of people who've enjoyed eating ice cream and also enjoyed reading, and we were to ask them which is the better pleasure, the overwhelming majority will say reading, according to Mill.
Wow, so there's something deep going on there. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Isn't it that people who employ higher faculties are often less content because they have a deeper sense of the limitations of the world?
Actually, people with higher faculties have pleasures of a higher character than that of an animal or a base human. Thus, the people best qualified to judge a pleasure's quality are people who have experienced both the higher and the lower.
To add to that, Mill believes that we know things through experience. So there is no other standard they wish to judge, according to Mill, other than experience. In order to judge which of two pleasures is better, you must have experienced both as pleasurable. If, for example, you enjoyed eating ice cream but found reading painful, you cannot judge which is the better pleasure.
Good point. Okay, next question. How could happiness be the rational aim of human life if it is unattainable?
Okay, I find it such an exaggeration to state that people cannot be happy. If you think about it, the major sources of unhappiness or selfishness and a lack of mental cultivation. Actually, it is fully within most people's capabilities to be happy if their education nurtures the appropriate values. I mean, most of the evils of the world, including poverty and disease, can be alleviated by a wise and energetic society devoted to their elimination, right?
I'm pretty sure you have a good point in that one. And okay, for the next question. What can you say about the claim people can exist without happiness and all virtuous people have become virtuous by renouncing happiness?
Easy. Martyrs must sacrifice happiness for some greater end. And what else could this be but the happiness of other people? Sacrifice is made so that others will not have to make similar sacrifices. Implicit in the sacrifice is the value of others' happiness. And the willingness to sacrifice one's happiness is the highest virtue. Also, to maintain an attitude of such willingness is actually the best chance of gaining happiness because it will lead a person to be tranquil about his life and prospects.
I totally agree with that. While utilitarians value sacrificing one's good for the good of others, they do not think that a sacrifice in itself is good. It is good insofar as it promotes happiness, but it's not good if it does not promote happiness. Ito nga kanina pa nating pinag-uusapan. So the utilitarian standard for judging an act is the happiness of all people, not of the agent alone.
Okay, so does this mean that a person must not value his own happiness over the happiness of others?
Yes, and law and education can actually help to instill this generosity in individuals. However, this does not mean that people's motives must only be to serve the greatest good. Indeed, utilitarianism is not concerned with the motives behind an action. The morality of an action depends on the goodness of its result only.
So basically parang ano 'no, kung lahat sana tayo kino-consider natin yung kasiyahan ng isa't isa. Okay, so very well. Let us proceed to the fifth question. Is it true that it leaves people cold and unsympathizing as it is concerned solely with the consequences of people's action and not to the individuals as moral or immoral in themselves?
Okay, good question. Come to think of it, if the criticism points out that utilitarianism does not let the rightness or wrongness of an action be affected by the kind of person who performs the action, then this will be a criticism of all morality, right? Morality says that all ethical standards judge actions in themselves without considering the morality of those who perform them.
Okay, then, next question. Is utilitarianism a godless doctrine?
Not really. The criticism depends on what we see to be the moral character of God. For if God desires the happiness of all his creatures, then utilitarianism is more religious than any other doctrine.
So technically, it has similarities with religion pala, no? So, okay, proceeding to the next question. Isn't it that utilitarianism is often conflated with expediency and therefore considered immoral?
Let's clear the terms first. Expedient. It usually refers to acting against what is right for the sake of personal interest or short term goals. Therefore, hurting society is not truly expedient, and that to act against society's interest is to be an enemy of morality.
Okay, so wow, we are already at the last question. What can you say about the claim that utilitarianism is too allowing as underestimating the immoral tendencies of human nature?
It is argued that a utilitarian will make his own case an exception to the rules and will be tempted to justify breaking the rules by just simply saying that a given action increases utility. This problem is not limited to utilitarian theories. All creeds must have exceptions because the need for exceptions is part of the reality of human life. So, in the end, having a standard of utility to invoke is better than to have no standard at all.
Okay, and so that's it, everyone. What an informative discussion we had. Thank you, Kaye and Jorella. To know more about the utilitarianism, make sure you watch their movie.
That's right, guys. Catch the utilitarianism worldwide in cinemas.
And let us know your thoughts by using the hashtag the utilitarianism.
Again, thank you so much. This is Aika wishing you all a productive day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.